Hey, are you there? Lucy, are you hearing me? Hey, it's Steve. So, Lucy, I thought I heard you moving around, but can you hear me? Okay, I'm talking.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yep,
I see that you're muted, Steve. I don't hear you at all, Steve.
I'm not muted.
It might be because I'm airplaying at my school, so let me check and see if I've got it right.
Thanks, Susan. That's actually helpful to know. That way we know that Lucy's got something going on her side.
Can you guys hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, you're coming through.
Okay, so you guys can hear me. I can't hear Steve. Is Steve talking?
Yeah, they can hear me.
Okay, I think it's because I'm airplaying. Hang on. Keep talking, Steve, so I can see if this is working.
Okay, I'm talking again.
Yep,
Oh,
I
I
can
hear
hear you
myself
now.
echoing.
We're good. We're good. We're good. Thank you. Awesome.
Okay, so Lucy, what I meant was if you pull up that Canvas slide you made for Tom and you screen share, then that will be the slide that people are seeing as they're waiting now.
Okay, let me find it. Hang on. Yeah.
Hey, Lucy, that slide looks great. And it does look like there's a preview on the top left. Oh, is there a way to put it into presentation mode? Maybe that was it.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay.
Hi, Tom. Looks like you're here. I'm assuming you've used Zoom before, but do you want to practice sharing your screen to share your slides?
Hey, Steve.
I hear you.
How you doing?
Good. How's your day?
Great. Are you east?
I am in North Carolina, yes.
Ah,
And it's a gorgeous day. How about you?
just another Seattle funky fall day.
Do you want to practice sharing your screen? Do you know how to do that?
No. Yes, let's try that.
So
Can I-
load your slides up in whatever program. I think you use Google Slides, right?
Yeah.
Load your slides up and put them into present mode. Then come back here and click on share at the bottom of the screen.
You cannot start screen share while other participant is sharing.
Oh, so Lucy's got to stop sharing. Okay, so there we go. Lucy must have stopped sharing, so try again. So do you have a way to go full screen there? Perfect. Okay, so what will happen is we'll have Lucy go back to that opening slide. And then Lucy, so Tom, you're probably going to have to stop sharing for her to do that. And then she'll share the opening slide. And then when she introduces you, you can start sharing your screen again.
Okay. And what about comments? Are we going to be able to see any comments?
Yes, so people can put comments in the chat. And if you click on that chat icon at the bottom, you'll see chat in the session room.
Okay.
And they can also do Q&A questions using the Q&A function here. And I'm actually going to, oh yeah, okay, thank you. You've stopped sharing your slides. Lucy, you can share again. Share Tom's main slide, yeah, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna take a 2-minute break and I'll be right back. Hey, Tom, I think Lucy would like me to introduce you. So when we get to that spot, is it okay if I just read the first paragraph of your bio?
Oh, if you have to, less is more. Feel free to do an abridged version.
I can just turn the time over to you and you can tell people about yourself.
I'm happy to. Don't need much. Here's Tom if you want to do that.
No. I'll do a little quickie
Yeah,
just so that
that's
people
fine.
know who you are.
Cool.
Okay, we're about 5 minutes away. When we get to the top of the hour, I'm going to hit the record button. We are broadcasting both in Zoom and on YouTube, and it'll take me about 10 seconds to kind of get things organized. Then I'll come back. I'll start the intro, and then Lucy, when I'm done with the intro, go ahead and stop screen sharing, and we'll let Tom screen share, and I'll talk you both through that.
And do you want camera on or no?
I think camera on with Zoom is preferred. So
All right.
if you're going to, that's great.
Cool.
Okay, and Lucy, if you want to put your Tom Vander Ark's slide back up, that would be great.
He's, if I'm sharing,
Yeah.
am I going to be able to see the chat?
If you're sharing, will you be able to see the chat?
I would have to leave.
Yeah, no, because you're going to be moving your slides forward, so you'll be in
All right. So
the
let me.
slides.
So a couple minutes in, I'd love to just ask them what their initial thoughts are on responsive schools. If I can encourage people to throw a couple answers into chat, and if you see any, would you just note those for me?
Yeah, I can manage that for you if you'd like.
Cool. So any time you see anything interesting going on in chat, feel free to dive in and do it live. I'm happy to take comments or questions live.
You're giving me free rein to interrupt you?
Totally.
That's dangerous.
No, I'm happy to. I think it's more fun if it stays conversational. So if you just want to go bullshit on something, feel free.
Okay, now I'll just manage any chat that comes through. If
Cool.
it seems like it's appropriate, I'll alert you.
Yeah.
Okay, we're 2 minutes away. at the top of the hour, I am going to hit record. We'll start with a brief intro of Tom, and then we'll move forward to his presentation. Thanks for being here, folks. Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the opening keynote session of the 2019 Global Education Conference. We're delighted to have Tom Vander Ark here. Tom is an advocate for innovations in learning. As the CEO of Getting Smart, he advises school districts and networks, education foundations, and funders and impact organizations on the path forward. A prolific writer and speaker, Tom is the author of Getting Smart, Smart Cities That Work for Everyone, Smart Parents, and Better Together, and has published thousands of articles, co-authored more than 50 books and white papers. He writes regularly on gettingsmart.com, LinkedIn, and contributes to Forbes. Tom, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
We're going to let you share your slides now.
All right. Hope those are live.
They are. Perfect.
Great. We good to go?
You are good to go.
Awesome. Would love to keep this as interactive as possible. So Steve is going to try to keep an eye on the chat window, and we'll jump in with questions and comments as we take a look at this topic: responsive schools. I want to start and end today just by I guess my wish for the day is that you think about what it means to be alive with possibilities. When you watch the news, there's a lot to be worried about, but I want to try to make the case that I would love to see schools alive with a sense of possibility, and we'll talk about what that means today. Let's start out by taking a look at this remarkable new century. Now that we're a couple decades into the 21st century, and in the chat box, if you want to make a note of why you think the 2020s are going to be a remarkable decade, or why this century that we're in is so remarkable in the sweep of history, go for it. But I have a half a dozen reasons here that I think set the stage for this idea of being responsive in education. The first is that just recently we crossed this threshold where half of us live in cities, and also, in a related note, about more than half of us are on the internet. So about 4 of the 7+ billion people on the planet are now connected, and almost 4 billion people live in urban areas. So that suggests to me perhaps the greatest learning opportunity in history is really connecting those next 4 billion people over the next 10 years or so. And it's going to be at 5G speed. So connecting people at what is now sort of unbelievable speed is a really amazing learning and working opportunity. I guess the challenge of that is, now that we all live in cities, how to create livable, sustainable, workable cities. Second thing is, in the last 20 years, we've really seen a tilt towards Asia. And now half of the world's economy, or very soon, about half of the world's economy will come from Asia. And in the last few years, we've seen the Indian economy pick up substantially. It's now bigger than the UK. It's twice that of Canada and Russia. And after this tilt to Asia, we'll see a tilt to Africa. It's quite possible that the African population will double by 2040. They could be almost, Africans could be almost a third of the world's total by then. In terms of the economy, I would say that we're a couple of years into a different economy, a new economy, one where behind the scenes, artificial intelligence and the subset that I've shown on the right, machine learning, are really reshaping every single sector. The net of working with smart machines is that every field is becoming computational. That's true if you're a soldier, an accountant, a lawyer, a real estate agent, if you're in a STEM field, if you're in manufacturing. Every field is now computational. And so the question for every field is, how do we address big questions with big data sets? These are super complicated questions. And as a result, we're more and more often working in big multidisciplinary teams. The ironic thing is that we're often doing it as freelancers or contingent employees. So we're doing more work in teams, but with less certainty about where our next job is going to come from. We increasingly live and learn and work on platforms. And the net of all of that is that these big, complicated man-made systems are often colliding with natural systems in new and unforeseen ways, and that's driving novelty and complexity. That means my grandkids are going to see maybe 5, maybe 10 times the novelty and complexity that I've seen in my life. And my career was in the information age, so it's I think AI behind everything has important implications. Not more than 30 years from now, we're going to see the rise of super intelligent computers. This is good news and bad news. It's going to help solve some of our most vexing problems. We'll be able to solve many diseases. We'll be able to create clean and inexpensive energy. We'll be able to take a lot of the drudgery out of work, but it's also going to pose a set of new existential risks. Stuart Russell wrote about that in his new book, Human Compatible. And he and others would argue that we've got maybe 20 years to really get in front of this and build algorithms that are human compatible, that are transparent about the bias that exists in these systems. So building in controls for what is likely to be super intelligent computers is going to be a really important development in the next 20 years. The good news is that if you have a good idea, it's much, much easier today than it was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago to get funded. About $250 billion in venture funding will flow in 2019. What's really new is that half of that is non-US, particularly in China. I want to note that when we started Learn Capital 10 years ago, there was almost no venture capital in education, and now there's a couple billion a year, so maybe almost 1% of that global total is flowing into education and learning. not what it should be, but a remarkable increase. And almost 500 billion in philanthropy will flow just in the United States. So the net of that is, if you have a good idea and you want to start a company or start a nonprofit or an initiative, it's much easier to get funding than it was 10 years ago. One thing that really concerns a lot of us is the climate crisis. We just finished the hottest October on record. And ironically, in the first couple of weeks of November, the country went into a deep freeze. And so we're going to see these crazy flips in the weather, from extremely hot to very cold, to big storms that move very slowly and dump massive amounts of rainfall. Remember in 2017 when we had Hurricane Harvey that had come just 2 months after another record-setting storm in Houston. So we'll see these, once in 100-year storms coming every few months in some places. We have the Amazon burning, and many experts would say that the 2020s and the 2030s are really the last chance for us to do something significant about climate change. That if we don't change the trajectory in the next few years, that we're going to speed past 2 degrees of warming to 3 or even 4, and that's going to mark very significant changes in life on Earth for billions and billions of people. So let's take a look at these interesting turning points. The good news is we're seeing AI used for good in many, many cases. There was just a great conference on this in Switzerland that the UN held. More and more people are connected. More people are taking climate action. We're seeing a lot of schools and organizations pay attention to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, #Global Goals. We're seeing the Business Roundtable advocate for stakeholder value, not just shareholder value, kind of a broader view of success. Autonomous vehicles are going to make our roads safer, make transportation more convenient and more accessible. The flip side is a lot to worry about. This 2020 election is going to be the first one significantly influenced by synthetic content or deep fakes. We've seen a rise in populism around the world, where people are really tricked into supporting an agenda that doesn't really do much to meet their needs. We're in a full surveillance society. We're seeing a spread of drones that can attack just about anyone, anywhere, complicated systems, and rising income inequality. So it's a point where it's a good news, bad news story, where our kids are walking into a complicated world, one where we've left them a lot of problems, but one where there is new opportunities to work with smart machines and make a big difference. So with that backdrop, I'd love your take on what does it mean to be a responsive school? In other words, how are responsive schools coping? How are they adjusting their approach given the remarkable and sometimes disconcerting time that we live in?
Tom, you should be able to switch back to Zoom to see the responses. It'll leave this slide up for us.
All right, should we stop sharing for a minute?
Not necessarily. If you go back, if you get over to the actual Zoom program, it should let you see the chat. So you're on a Mac and I'm a PC guy, but
Yeah.
I'm actually a Chromebook guy. But how would you like switch between windows?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, the multinationals handling data, that's very, very prevalent. In the United States, we've sort of punted to Facebook and we want them to fix our privacy problems. So how to help governments deal with these new and really complicated Barbara says that schools need to be student-centered. I think that's a great answer, Barbara. And I would say building student agency, their sense of being self-knowledgeable, their being confident of their ability to act on the world is super important. So when you say student-centered, I think about agency. Being proactive, Jennifer, thanks. Maybe being nimble. Start from the outcomes that kids really need and then back map. Mark, that's a terrific answer. SEL, the social emotional learning, has to be, I think, at the top of everybody's list. Yeah, the 4 C's and resilience, really building resilience. Project-based learning, place-based. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, the factory model, right? It doesn't make sense anymore. I think we need to be having that conversation. Thanks, Lucy. Creativity, mindsets, yeah, student agency. Asking questions. So this idea, Margie, of question asking, right? Or the problem finding might be even more important than problem solving, right? Making sure that you're asking the right questions. Yeah, at-risk kids, celebrating the questions. Thanks. That's a super good list. So let's, let me flip back.
You should just be able to click on present again. So Tom, somehow you muted yourself.
All right, we're back. Here's 20 quick answers that I've been thinking about. The first is that I think responsive schools are really intentional about their culture, about an inclusive culture, one where the adults are really intentional about behaviors and about how people are treated. It's related to this next one, that responsive schools know and care for students. I want to add that this, I think, in addition to being, relational first, also has to be about safety. And this is, today it's physical and emotional safety, but good schools have concentric circles of often an advisory that might be 15 students, and then it might be a cohort, and then it might be a house, then a larger school, so that there are nested relationships where kids feel known and cared for. The sense of belonging is probably the most important thing that we can create in a learning environment. This is a picture of High Tech High, one of my favorite schools, and Larry Rosenstock talks about schools that have a common intellectual mission. At High Tech High, they have a common set of design principles. So I might amend this to say it's not only a vision of a desired future state, but it's a framework that includes design principles that guide how the school iterates. And the school can share this common set of ideas succinctly, but you can unpack it for a day. So it's both concise and it's deep. Responsive schools are really intentional about their outcomes. Many of them have gone through a process of having a community conversation. We like to ask, what's happening in the world, or how's the world changed since you were in school? What do you think that means for you and your kids and your community? As a result, what should kids know and be able to do? And then finally, what kinds of experiences are most likely to produce those outcomes? Check out portraitofagraduate.org from Battelle for some great examples. This is Daniel Kerr. He's the head of the lower school at the American School of Paris. And I think they've got a great outcome framework, and Daniel's really intentional about how they combine personalized learning and maker ed and project-based learning to really get at the priority outcomes. Responsive schools know the learning science. I included just a quick summary from Digital Promise, but if you go to digitalpromise.org and look at the learning science tab, they have a terrific summary of learning sciences that remind us that high expectations matter, that hard work and the ability to make mistakes is really important, that spacing and retrieval is important, that we recognize interest and autonomy, as we just talked about, safety and well-being are super important, and that the environment can really matter. I want to encourage you when you go to Digital Promise also to take a look at the Learner Variability Project. This is a new project that helps you understand the different ways that young people learn and develop, and it helps you match strategies with observations that you're making about learners. They just did a great update on their website, so check that out. That's the Learner Variability Project at digitalpromise.org. Responsive schools engage students in meaningful work. These are a couple of schools from El Paso. I think the best active learning turnaround story in America in the last 10 years. This was the worst example of test prep culture and curriculum that led to cheating and embezzlement. And when the new superintendent, Juan Cabrera, took over 7 years ago, he put in an active learning vision. And what you see on the left is an example of a dual language 9th grade STEM classroom where they're using blended learning and hands-on learning in both English and Spanish in a beautiful way. On the right side, you see one of the 10 new tech academies that they launched to jumpstart their agenda there. So a great example of using these micro schools, small academies on existing campuses to illustrate the future of learning in El Paso. And so in all 90 of their schools today, they really do a great job of engaging kids in meaningful work. Some of you mentioned place-based learning. Teton Science schools, tetonscience.org, are really best in class at thinking about place and immersing kids in the place. And wherever that place is, they not only do a great job with their own schools, they have almost 20,000 young people visit them for on-site camps. And they're also, they've launched a national network called the Place Network. And that's a network of rural micro schools that all share the basics: wonder, discovery, and experience. Responsive schools really enable youth contribution. One of our favorite examples is One Stone in Boise. They talk about creating an army of good for good. I was there 2 weeks ago at a student voice summit that their young people ran, and it culminated with a dozen youth pitches for ways to make a contribution in the community. And this is the subject of our new book. We really love this idea of helping young people figure out who they are and what they're good at and what they care about and how and where they'll make their first contribution. Doing deep work means that you have structures that support deep work. My favorite example is Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. This is Chris Lehman with his son. So that's the proud look of Papa on the right there. But in between them, you'll see a set of core instructional values. And what I love about SLA is that they're consistent classroom to classroom. So you go down the hall to the math classroom and you'll see a senior presenting a lesson to other students. So they really live these values of inquiry and collaboration and presentation, and they have a structure and supports and professional learning that all support deep work. Responsive schools really value quality public work. One of my favorite examples is at Palo Alto High School, where Esther Wojcicki and her colleagues have built the best journalism program in the world. Students lead 10 different publications that are world-class in nature. And I love the fact that to start a new publication, students have to build a business plan and show how that publication will become self-supporting. So a great example of student leadership, quality public work. Good schools also promote demonstrated mastery. Some people call this competency-based learning or performance-based learning, but it's really inviting kids to do authentic work and allowing them to move on when they've demonstrated mastery. Lindsay is a small district in the Central Valley of California. They do a terrific job. You can see on the left, they've broken down some walls between classrooms to allow students to move easily during reading and math time into leveled groups. Kids in Lindsay do a great job of goal setting every day. You can stop every kid and ask them what they're learning today and what they want to learn tomorrow. Responsive schools provide career exposure and guidance. The best example of that is Cajon Valley, a small K-8 district east of San Diego, where between kindergarten and 8th grade, they cycle through 54 integrated units that explore different career opportunities. And during each of those, young people are asking themselves, who am I and what am I good at? What do I care about? What are my values? And how do those things line up with these career opportunities? So a great example of career exploration that really allows high school kids to make thoughtful pathway decisions. Responsive schools also connect kids to opportunities. You know, for 20 years, we've been pushing kids to college, and that's not always a good idea, especially if you go to college without a sense of purpose and make an expensive mistake. We're seeing more and more high schools create really thoughtful pathways that are what Ryan Craig would call in his new book, A New You, a hard sprint to a good first job. You're seeing a picture here of Ramtech in Ohio. It's the best robotics training program available to teenagers on the planet. These are 3 of the first teens to earn certification in the 2 leading robotics programs in 2014, and they were immediately hired by Honda, who gave them a scholarship to college. They're now all out of college. They are Honda certified, all making 6-figure salaries. And this is really my first important exposure to these earn and learn ladders that don't force you to choose between college and work. They are college and work, and very, very lucrative work. Responsive schools attract and develop great teacher talent. One of my favorite examples is Summit Public Schools, a network in California and Washington. The cool thing about this is that students 4 times a year get a 2-week break called an expedition, and they get to choose from 50 different experiences. And during those expeditions, the teachers get 8 to 10 weeks of professional learning time. So they get time to go visit other schools, to work together. It's really the most extensive commitment to teacher development in the sector. And it's behind it is a beautiful competency-based system where teachers progress and unlock learning and leadership opportunities for themselves. So personalized learning is for kids and for teachers. Responsive schools distribute leadership. Mrs. Dennis from Singapore American School. It's a big school on a single campus, about 4,000 kids. Of the 400 faculty, over 180 are in leadership positions. So those are grade span team leads, they're initiative leads, they're teachers that are coaching. So a great example of distributing leadership to a lot of folks on campus. Responsive schools really embrace equity in their culture, in their hiring, in the way that kids are known and cared for, in the way they look at data. This is Will from One Stone. He happens to be one of 2 patent attorneys that work in that building. So looking for non-traditional sources of great talent so that kids see themselves in leaders on campus. And responsive schools have inspiring learning environments. This is one of my favorite examples in Albemarle County, that's Charlottesville, Virginia, where they've been building these beautiful new multi-age classrooms. There's about 6 classrooms here, but you can see they're broken up in different levels, and they vary between in ceiling height, and so it can feel both cozy and expansive simultaneously. There's lots of different kinds of seating, high top, low top, hard and soft. It's a beautiful and inspiring environment, and we're seeing more and more people think differently about learning spaces. Great schools have great advocacy partners. My favorite example is Dallas County Promise. This is the best Promise program in the country. This is Eric Ban, who runs the program. We just visited him last week. He's working with almost 100 high schools in the county, and I get a very data-rich email from Eric every Friday night that's telling the story of how schools are doing a better job of getting kids on track to graduation, helping them fill out FAFSA forms, applying to college, and then getting into college. So Dallas County Promise is part of Commit Partnership. Their success in Dallas led them to a statewide effort, and they were really behind HB3, the giant $9 billion school funding bill in Texas this year. So Dallas County Promise and Commit have been great partners both for Dallas and for schools in Texas. As we conclude here, responsive schools really partner with youth and family services. So they provide youth and family services, and they bring them into the building. One of my favorite examples is Da Vinci Schools. This is just south of LAX in El Segundo. They're part of the Weisburn district. So it's an interesting combination of a set of charter schools that were adopted by a K-8 district, and together they work closely with nonprofits like South Bay Families. So we'll close with a thought from High Tech High. I just love how they describe their intent to integrate hands and minds in inquiry across multiple disciplines, engaging kids in meaningful work that matters to them, to their teachers, and to the outside world. And if you, we'll close before we jump into some comments with a little inspiration. We call this the Just Do It poem from William Stafford, but I love this thought of, in the second line, what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for time to show you some better thoughts. And then he closes with, what can anyone give you greater than now, starting right here, right in this room when you turn around. So I hope you take what we've talked about today and try to put it into practice in your school this afternoon, right when you turn around. Let's dive into some questions.
So if you've got questions for Tom, go ahead and put them in the chat. He's going to watch that. Tom, there's something of a dilemma here, right? This is a profoundly positive vision. When I ask people what percentage of graduating high school seniors in the U.S. graduate as competent adults, I get kind of shocked looks and half laughs and a sense that maybe it's a very small number. How do we reconcile kind of the numbers of kids who leave school not feeling good about themselves and the desire to have everybody get a good education?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. I'm afraid we've been focusing on the wrong things, and I have culpability for this, having helped to stand up the All Kids College Ready. This was all done with a real equity focus, but I'm afraid it and No Child Left Behind and even Common Core sort of solidified this discipline-based 6 or 8 period day, this disconnected content-oriented vision of high school. And so the net of it is just high school sucks for most kids, and it's boring, it's irrelevant, it's difficult, but in ways that are not very meaningful. I've been writing about mathematics lately. I think what we do to kids in high school math is ridiculous. The focus on symbol manipulation and memorizing and regurgitating formulas, rather than meaningful problem solving, learning data science, using probability and statistics to attack real world problems. Those are all examples of creating school for adults and not school for kids. So I think it starts with a new mission. Somebody at the outset talked about a student-centered mission, but that really does mean starting with the kids and making agency a priority. And if we have schools that are based on routine and compliance, we'll never grow kids that are ready for novelty and complexity. So this means schools that help kids come to understand who they are, what they're good at, what they care about, and how and where they want to make a difference in the world. I think that means a very different kind of a day. Let me just close this answer with, I think it implies a fundamentally different architecture for school. I was at Purdue Polytechnic High School in Indianapolis last week, and Purdue Poly and One Stone are examples of schools that don't have courses in the traditional way. They engage kids in skill sprints and projects that are meaningful to them and their community, and skill sprints that help them accelerate their skill development in reading, writing, communication, in problem solving, in useful mathematics. And I think conceptualizing school in that way of meaningful projects and skill sprints is much more student-centered, much more engaging, and ultimately much more valuable to young people.
Okay, you've got lots of questions in the chat. I'm going to scroll up and get you started on the first one. Heike asks, do responsive schools support the Fridays for Future initiative, or is this more European?
Sorry, I don't know that. Do you?
I don't either.
I like the idea. I mean, if I would do whatever you can, and if that's starting on Friday and connecting kids to the community, go for it.
Next question is from Connie. What are the leverage points you see in systems to move the education this direction?
Yeah, take what you can get. Work from the edges in, start anywhere you can, start today, start small, iterate up. So I can't tell you in your system what the answer is, but start in your classroom, start with another teacher, create a blended unit that's more connected to the community. If that works, turn it into a summer school. If that works, turn it into a micro school. You have to be really opportunistic here in looking for ways to make school more valuable.
So Tom, is there an inherent dilemma, and I'm interested in the audience who are global here.
Yeah.
Mandatory public schooling is essentially a sort of a form of governance, right? It's a way of sort of doing a good job of bringing people into a culture and managing it. Is that sort of at its heart at odds with the kind of progressive ideas of individual agency? Meaning we've had really good independent progressive schools for decades now.
Yeah.
They never become the primary way of schooling. And is that because schooling in and of itself is actually really geared toward sort of developing people to be workers?
I think there's always tension between equity and innovation. I'm really drawn to this question. I'm leaving for South Africa right after this, where I'm going to be talking to school heads about how to innovate without getting fired. And it's really at the heart of this tension between equity and innovation. How do we create systems that are equitable, but how do we make sure that we are nimble and responsive? And so I think that's true at a school level, but it's as you pointed out, also true at a system level. So Steve, my answer would be that I think a portfolio approach is the right answer. And in most cities in America, we have the beginning of a portfolio approach where there's a variety of options created and being created that serve the needs of diverse families and kids. In Europe, it's interesting to note that they're not hung up in the unusual way that we are in America with church and state. And so there are lots of faith-based schools that are also public schools, but they exist within a public portfolio. So I do think there's a healthy view. I'm Dutch by background, and I appreciate the Dutch point of view on this, that it's quite easy for groups of families to form new schools within the public system. And I think that sort of nimbleness and responsiveness is going to be really, really important as the pace of change picks up.
There's an hour's worth of questions in the chat. I don't want to presume to choose which ones. I'm going to let you take a minute and scroll and just find some that are interesting for you. There have also been a couple put in the Q&A. So if you click on that QA button down at the bottom, you'll see 3 questions that have been asked in the Q&A. Is that too much for you? You want me to pick some, or are you ready to scroll through?
Great questions. Thanks so much to everybody for your responses. How do I make my rural school responsive? So I think this is super an important question. I'd love to have you take a look at placeschools.org. That's the place network that I mentioned earlier. I'm really excited about the opportunity of rural micro schools. I think there's an opportunity in America to open thousands of micro schools, many in rural areas. We've probably lost 3,000 rural schools in America. They were consolidated into bigger schools, and that was thought to be better. And I think it's been disastrous for many rural communities that have lost their high school, and as a result sort of lost the fabric of their community. So micro schools that are deeply rooted in a sense of place, that introduce kids to the place that they're from, that take advantage of both the local places, online learning, and then also travel to distant places. I think you can create very inspiring, very small schools, many of which that could operate in connected networks. We think this is really, really terrific. I would say that it's important that states have equitable funding that makes this possible, that doesn't, that don't rely on just on local tax dollars, but where it's been equalized across the state based on need. Kat talked about this tension between innovation and equity is, I think this is so important. How I love to quote Pam Moran here. She was an educator in Albemarle for 32 years, and as a superintendent, she said, "How can I say yes to every opportunity that a teacher team brings forward? And simultaneously, as soon as that works, how can I create access for others?" So this tension between saying yes and supporting innovation, and then making sure that every student in every house in your system or your state has equitable access to high quality. And think about the spaces that she was building in Albemarle. So one or two at a time, building out these beautiful spaces, that in and of itself creates inequity in a system. So you have to run bonds to make sure that everybody has access to those. So you have this tension of innovation creating inequity, but then putting your vision on a timeline so that you can guarantee to your community that every kid in our community is going to have access to these kind of experiences in the next 3 years. So keeping that tension alive, I think, is the best you can do. Eradicating poverty and promoting equity. Thanks. I am really worried about income inequality. So AI is really powerful, and it's allowing kids, even in high school, to address some of the world's most pressing problems in really, really sophisticated ways. I'm very excited about that. And simultaneously, AI has this aggregating power where it's helping the biggest companies become bigger and the richest people become richer. And so what this is going to do is press every municipality, every state, every country to come to terms with the fact that we're going to see accelerating income inequality. So how to deal with this productively, how to learn to share, basically, could be the most important issue of our time. We can, with the resources we have today and the problem fighting ability that we're developing, solve the problems we face. We can end poverty in the next 10 years on planet Earth, but it will require us to build some new agreements on how we share the extraordinary wealth and benefit that have been and will be created. So how to educate young people to be part of that sharing solution and that sharing economy, I think is super important.
Tom, want me to pull one from the chat for the Q&A?
Yeah.
So Mark asks, do you fear those who seek to undermine progress on mindset, grit, differentiation, etc., by claiming that hard data can't find sufficient positive impact for those approaches?
Yeah, well, that's just a dumb answer, because so I appreciate the question. I think what Mark is concerned about is that people are looking to traditional measures for new answers. You know, so do you see an improvement in standardized test scores as a result of trying to teach grit and growth mindset? So led the X Prize for a few years, which was really fun place to work, where we tried to create big challenges for some of the world's biggest problems. And we often had to create new metrics that would tell us if we're becoming successful. And so anytime you try to do something new, you do the best that you can to measure with old metrics, but you do have to create a set of new metrics that help you monitor your progress. So one of the new challenges, a number of you mentioned social emotional learning. We do have to build a set of new metrics that help us understand human development in more fully, and what it means to have a sense of agency, what it means for me to collaborate effectively and authentically. Mark, let me give you an example from one of my favorite networks, is the New Tech Network. We wrote a book together called Better Together. It argues that the work that everybody on this webinar is doing is really, really hard. It's complicated in many ways, and that you should find your tribe and work with them. One way that the New Tech Network answers this question, Mark, is that they have rubrics that measure agency and collaboration on every project that every student does. And so they go through a difficult collaborative project, and then they get feedback on how they exhibited agency and the extent to which they collaborated in that project. And so to me, that's a great example of building a new set of measures that provide valuable feedback on what might be the most important outcomes. So the new challenge for us as school and system leaders is build dashboards using the best data that we have available, use survey data, use observational data, let people know that it's new data and it's going to get better over time. But if you only rely on historical standardized test data, that's all we'll ever have. So use new data to show progress of learning when and how you can, I guess.
Is part of this that there's just a temptation when there's data to use it from a top-down standpoint rather than from a bottom-up? Meaning, at core, true education comes from internally, from inside out.
Yeah,
It's really hard to measure, and it's really hard to produce. And so it's a lot easier to say, okay, well, we've got this external data, and now we're going to do this in order to make the data better. Is that just a human dilemma?
It is, but let's try to walk into it instead of ignore it, right? We built this system of standards-based reform, and I already admitted some culpability for that, to promote equity, but we used a set of bad measures inappropriately, and it led to a set of terrible unintended consequences. What we need to do now are build new measures that better describe human development. I'm a big advocate now of what we call an extended transcript. So for the next few years, you can use your existing transcript. That's a list of courses and grades that you took in secondary school. But I think schools and systems ought to create an extended transcript that better describes the new capabilities that young people have. And to Mark's point, I think we can include measures of and examples of mindset and grit, the success skills that you need to be successful at work. So schools can develop a growth transcript that shows how kids have grown in these areas. And then it's even better if it's a click through to a portfolio that shows evidence of how young people have grown. Building regional agreements around those growth transcript. We're starting to see this happen in Dallas, around the Dallas County Promise. I think we're going to see this happen in Kansas City around the Kauffman Foundation's Real World Learning Initiative. These regional agreements around an extended transcript, the use of portfolios, exhibitions of learning. I think all of these are going to be better ways of describing and sharing human capability. And the bottom line, Steve, is we have to help kids get better at telling their own story in compelling ways.
It's so funny because my own dad, who ended up being dean of admissions at Stanford and then dean of admissions at Princeton, he was a ne'er-do-well and kind of reinvented himself after the Army. And so one of the concerns I think that sort of exists is all of this tracking, does it take away the opportunity for kids to actually sort of figure themselves out and reinvent, because there's this huge record of where people feel like they already are?
Right. There's tension in every good idea. And I would add to that tension, I am now an advocate of what I mentioned earlier, a hard sprint to a good first job. I want that to be a good first job where lifelong learning is embraced, and where it is open to opportunity, where it doesn't preclude opportunity. I recognize that idea could turn into pathways that feel like they trap kids in a track. I'm really worried about retracking schools, especially where low-income kids are tracked into certain pathways, and that this could be driven by these learner profiles. So I think your question suggests that we are cautious. I think it goes back to this equity and innovation paradox, but I am excited about the number of schools that we're seeing that are beginning to reframe their mission as one where they want to help kids make a difference in the world, where they want to help young people begin to contribute. And I think that's a really, really productive direction. And if we live into that mission, I think we can avoid the problems that you spoke about.
Oh, these are such good questions. Okay, so we promised people 5-minute breaks between the sessions. So Tom, do you want to leave any information about yourself or how to get in contact with you or what to read before we close out?
Yeah, so thanks for joining the Global Education Conference. This is a terrific event. I have a blog up on Getting Smart today, gettingsmart.com, that runs through these 20 ideas. So take a look at that. We have a new book coming out on place-based education with ASCD in a couple months that will go into a lot more detail on the idea of rural micro schools and how every school can help kids take advantage of the place that they're from. So check out gettingsmart.com. If you want to learn more about school networks, take a look at Better Together. And thanks for being with us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Tom. That was really terrific. Okay, in about 4 minutes, we've got a whole set of sessions starting. Hope you have a great day in this first day of the Global Education Conference. Bye now. Thanks, Tom. I got to run. Take care.
Hi, Tom. It's Lucy. Just want to say hello and say thank you, and we'll be in touch. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon, everyone, if you're in the U.S.